Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into a frontier winter that does not care how brave you are, how neat your cabin looks, or how confidently you once spoke about roughing it. You stand in the pale light of late autumn and watch the trees go still, as if the whole land is holding one long breath. The air already tastes thinner. The mud at the edge of the yard has a brittle crust by dawn. Somewhere in the distance, an axe knocks against wood with that lonely, hollow sound that always seems louder in cold weather. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step into the year 1815, where winter on the American frontier is not a picturesque dusting of snow, but a test of memory, judgment, and nerve. You wake before sunrise because the cold does not respect your wish for sleep. It presses through the chinks of the cabin walls and settles on your blanket like a second skin. The straw tick beneath you has gone lumpy. Your fingers are stiff. When you breathe, the air feels raw in your nose, and the inside of the cabin carries the smells of ash, damp wool, old smoke, and the faint salt of last night's pork grease. Outside, the first light reveals a world turning hard. The grass glitters with frost. The bucket near the door has a thin lid of ice. The trees stand black and bare against the paling sky, all elegance and threat at once. Beautiful, yes. Also rude. The frontier has a talent for doing both together. By 1815, settlers moving into the interior of the United States already know many winter lessons the hard way. Cabins are often small, quickly built, and improved only when time allows. Some are made of rough logs with clay or mud packed between them. Some are sturdier than others. Some are little more than hope assembled with an axe. Historians generally agree that frontier families depended on autumn preparation, with a seriousness that modern people reserve for far more theatrical emergencies. There is no quick trip to the store, no kindly plough truck, no emergency thermostat. You prepare well, or you become a cautionary tale told in a low voice by spring. The morning begins with the fire. It always begins with the fire. You kneel at the hearth and stir life from yesterday's embers, if any remain, then feed them slivers of dry wood, then larger sticks, then another split log. The smoke catches in your throat before it finds the chimney. Your eyes water. Soon the room warms only a little, just enough for the ache in your hands to loosen. That modest warmth feels like wealth. You do not get to admire it for long. Winter preparation is made of lists that never end. Wood must be checked. Water must be hauled. Food stores must be counted again, because somehow numbers look less generous in cold weather. The latch on the door must be tested. The roof must be watched for weak places. A crack small enough to ignore in October becomes a personal insult in January. You pull on coarse wool that scratches at your neck and wrists. The cloth is heavy and faintly sour from repeated wear. Linen beneath it does little against the morning bite. Your shoes are stiff. The ground outside rings underfoot. Somewhere nearby, a pig gives a short, irritated grunt, and chickens mutter from their shelter in tones that suggest they are unimpressed by the season and by you personally. The soundscape of the frontier in winter is oddly spare. No summer insects, fewer birds. The wind speaks more often than anything alive. It brushes through dry weeds, nudges the cabin wall, and moves across the treetops with a low murmur that makes the emptiness feel larger. When a dog barks in the distance, you notice. When an axe falls, you count the blows without meaning to. In such a place, sound becomes company. Your nearest neighbours may not be close by the standards of older settlements. A mile can be near. 3 miles can be normal. 5 can still count as reachable, assuming weather and daylight cooperate, which they often do not. That means winter is not only about cold, it is about distance. It stretches the land between people until help feels theoretical, so you begin the season with vigilance. The frost this morning is only a warning, not the full punishment. That almost makes it worse, because it gives you time to imagine what is coming. You look over the woodpile and try to calculate how many nights of serious cold it will cover. Frontier diaries and memoirs often reveal a peculiar blend of plainness and alarm. Writers list barrels, sacks, and cuts of meat with almost prayerful attention. They understood that survival could hinge on details so dull they now seem boring. But boredom is a luxury. On the frontier, inventory is suspense. You crouch near the stacked firewood and smell fresh split oak, clean and sharp. Good wood has a sweetness to it. Rotting wood smells tired. Wet wood smells like failure. You touch each piece automatically, judging dryness by habit. Then you count more kindling because big logs are noble and impressive. But it is the humble kindling that saves your morning. Food comes next. In the cool dimness of the cabin, you inspect what has been stored away. Cornmeal, dried beans, maybe some flour. If luck and planning held, salt pork, perhaps smoked meat, perhaps strips of venison if hunting went well. Apples stored for as long as they will keep. A crock of pickles if anyone in the household had patience and foresight. Frontier diets in winter were repetitive by necessity. Corn appears again and again, because maize was a dependable staple in many regions. Salt preserves meat, though it also makes everything taste as if the ocean has taken up residence in your mouth. Some mornings, you eat quickly and without romance. Corn mush, a bit of pork fat, coffee if your household can get it. Those substitutes made from roasted grains or roots are not unknown. One quirky frontier tidbit is that some people stretch scarce coffee with roasted rye, wheat, peas, or even burnt bread, producing a drink that looked encouraging in dim light and tasted like disappointment with a smoky finish. Yet a warm cup in cold hands still lifts the spirit. Expectations were practical then. Delicious was nice. Warm was essential. As the day grows brighter, chores pull you outward. The sky has that washed, pale quality that often comes before deeper cold. You carry water, and the wooden yoke bites at your shoulders. The iron handle of a bucket burns your skin with chill. You can feel the rough grain of the wood through your gloves, or through bare hands if gloves are too clumsy, and you're making a bad decision in the name of efficiency. Frontier life is full of these little bargains with discomfort. You trade warmth for speed, dryness for progress, rest for completion. The bill always comes due later. Children. If there are children in the cabin, do not float through this life like decorative cherubs in rosy paintings. They work. They fetch chips, gather eggs, mind younger siblings, twist fibres, card wool, carry, sweep, watch, and learn. Older people again too. Keep working as long as they can. Winter does not politely reduce expectations because someone feels tired. Everyone is useful in some way. Even silence is useful when concentration is required. You walk the perimeter of the cabin, checking how the structure meets the ground. Drafts creep from below. Vermin do too. Mice are a winter certainty in many cabins. Historians still argue over exactly how much frontier households exaggerated tales of rodent invasions in later recollections, but there is little doubt that small animals were frequent, unwelcome companions. A mouse in the wall sounds astonishingly large at night. A scratching noise under the floor can inspire imaginative theories involving raccoons, rats, spirits, or all three. The door's another concern. Doors swell, shrink, warp, and sulk. They let needles of air that find your ankles from across the room. You inspect the latch and frame. You look at the hide or cloth used to block cracks. None of it seems quite enough. This is one of the psychological burdens of frontier winter. You are never fully finished preparing. There is always one more seam to fill, one more loose board, one more nagging thought at the back of your mind. By midday, the cold softens only slightly. Sunlight falls across the clearing in a weak gold wash, too thin to trust. The smell of the earth has changed since summer. It is less green now, more mineral, more leaf mould and bark, with a faint sweetness from decaying plants beneath the sharp air. Smoke rises from the cabin in a narrow thread. It smells comforting from a distance. Less so when it sits trapped inside your clothes. The emotional texture of this season is complicated. You're not merely afraid, though fear is there. You're not merely busy, though busyness rules the hours. There is also pride in competence, satisfaction in a stacked pile, calm in a repeated task. You learn the landscape more intimately in winter because it strips itself bare. Hills show their shape. Streams announce their location by ice and sound. Animal tracks write brief stories across mud and frost. A rabbit print near the woodline, deer tracks by the creek, fox, light and clever. You notice such things because they matter. Hunting may still supplement your food, and signs of game mean possibility. At the same time, winter hunting is not the effortless abundance of storybook fantasy. It is long walking, cold waiting, and frequent disappointment. A shot must count. Powder and lead are not things to squander. A missed opportunity can sour your mood for hours. You also keep an eye on the sky, because weather arrives as rumour before it arrives as fact. A ring around the moon, a certain stillness at dusk, the direction of the wind, the behaviour of animals, all are read as signs. Some of these beliefs are practical, some are inherited, some are probably nonsense that survived because people love a pattern, especially when nature makes them feel small. One old saying might send you out to cover a stack or bring in extra wood. Another might merely make you stare suspiciously at a cloud. Either way, winter turns everyone into a reluctant amateur prophet. Toward evening, the cabin becomes the centre of existence again. Light fades fast. The cold returns with authority. You bring in another armload of wood and feel the bark scrape your sleeves. The fire pops, a kettle steams, shadows gather in the corners. The smell of supper deepens the room, maybe beans thickening near the hearth, maybe a skillet of coarse bread, maybe salted meat sending up that rich, heavy scent that promises fuel more than pleasure. This is when the social side of survival becomes visible. A cabin is not just shelter, it is a container for patience. People eat close together, work close together, breathe the same smoky air, and hear every cough, every sigh, every restless turn. Privacy is scarce. Irritation is natural. Humour helps. Gentle teasing helps more. Frontier families often relied on storytelling, singing, simple games, sewing, mending, and tool repair during the evening hours. Hands stayed busy, mind stayed steadier that way. You sit near the fire and feel one side of your body grow warm while the other stays cool. This is frontier luxury, not even warmth. Uneven warmth. You stretch your boots toward the hearth, the leather loosens slightly, your face picks up the scent of smoke, and your hair does too, until you carry the cabin with you like a portable chimney. In 1815, the broader world is changing. The War of 1812 has recently ended. Though news and consequences travel unevenly across the frontier, some settlements feel the aftershocks through trade, migration, insecurity, and rumour. But inside this cabin, winter has reduced global events to their local meaning. Do you have enough powder, enough cloth, enough iron tools, enough salt? Grand politics are all very interesting until the bucket freezes and the roof leaks. There is a scholarly uncertainty here that lingers in the records. Researchers continue to debate how representative surviving frontier memoirs really are, since many were written years later and often polished into stories of grit, suffering, or triumph. Memory is a tricky narrator. People omit dullness, they enlarge danger, they tide confusion. Yet even with that caution, a basic truth remains clear. Winter on the American frontier demanded constant practical intelligence. It was not a single dramatic ordeal, but 1,000 ordinary decisions made correctly, again and again. While tired and cold, night settles fully. The dark outside the cabin windows is thick, almost material. The forest seems to lean closer. You hear the fire shifting on the hearth. The soft rattle of dried kernels in a sack when someone moves it. The faint crack of cooling timber overhead. Maybe a dog stirs. Maybe wind touches the wall and then moves on. Every sound invites interpretation. Is that branch scrape harmless, or a sign the weather is rising? Is that creak from the roof just settling, or a warning? You listen because listening is another frontier skill. At last, you lie down again with smoke in your clothes and fatigue in every muscle. The blanket feels coarse but welcome. The cabin has cooled already away from the hearth. Your feet are slow to warm. Through the wall comes the low winter hush of the land, not empty exactly, but waiting. Tomorrow will require the same labour and then some. More wood, more checking, more counting, more caution, and yet, as your eyes grow heavy, another feeling settles in beside the worry. You have begun. The first frost has come, and you are still here. The cabin stands. The fire lives. Supplies remain on their shelves. Your hands remember what to do. On the frontier, that counts as comfort. It is not a grand comfort. It does not sing. It does not shine. It simply holds on through the cold, one careful day at a time, while the long winter gathers itself beyond the door. By the time real winter approaches, the cabin stops being a house in the cheerful sense and becomes something more serious. It turns into a machine for staying alive. Every gap matters. Every loose shake on the roof matters. Every careless habit becomes a draft. And every draft becomes a small act of betrayal. You start with the walls. Log cabins on the American frontier in 1815 vary wildly in quality. Because frontier skill is not evenly distributed and timber does not politely shape itself. Some cabins are neatly notched and tightly fitted. Others look as if determination did most of the carpentry. The spaces between logs must be packed with chinking and daubing, a mixture that often includes sticks, mud, clay, moss, straw, or whatever the local ground and good sense can provide. The work is messy, cold, and strangely intimate. You press damp material into the seams with stiff fingers, feeling the rough edges of the log snag your skin. The mud smells dark and metallic. Moss has a sour woodland scent. Clay clings under your nails and stays there like a judgment. The problem is not only keeping cold out, it is keeping heat in long enough to matter. A fire can make a cabin feel almost kind for 10 blessed minutes. Then a sharp wind slides through the wall and reminds you who is actually in charge. So you move slowly around the room and test it with your body. You can feel weak spots on your cheeks and wrists. Air leaks are often invisible but never subtle. One thread of cold against your neck can feel more offensive than a whole open door, perhaps because it arrives with the sly confidence of something convinced you will not notice. You notice. A frontier cabin is rarely symmetrical in comfort. One corner may stay tolerable, another may behave like an outpost of the Arctic. Beds are often arranged with a tactical mind. Storage is arranged the same way. You do not place precious food where damp or frost can ruin it. You do not leave cloth against a wall that sweats with condensation. You do not trust appearances, because a spot that looks dry in daylight may turn clammy by dawn. Roofs demand their own kind of anxiety. In many places, a cabin roof might be made of wooden shingles or split clapboards weighed down with poles. It may do the job nicely in fair weather, then start leaking with the first serious freeze and thaw. You climb up when needed, boots slipping on rough surfaces, fingers numb around cold wood, and test what has loosened. Snow has not yet piled heavily, but winter has already begun its negotiations with gravity. The smell up there is different from the smell inside. Fresh wood, old bark, distant smoke, cold sky. It feels cleaner, almost noble, until the wind cuts across your face and waters your eyes. You learn to respect the wind as a personality. It does not simply blow, it searches, it finds corners, lifts edges, sneaks under doors, and taps at every weakness with a patient hand. In open country, it can strike a cabin broadside and make the whole structure groan. In wooded places it moans through branches, then drops suddenly, leaving a silence so complete you can hear the settling of ash inside the hearth. Some settlers planted cabins near timber for shelter from the wind, though trees brought their own worries. Falling limbs are not charming in a winter storm. The door is often the true battlefield. It opens too often, closes badly, and receives more blame than it deserves. A warped wooden door can stick in wet weather, then shrink in dry cold and leave a gap along the jamb wide enough to invite a line of icy air across the floor. You hang extra cloth, you tack on animal hide, you push a rolled rag against the threshold. None of this is elegant. Frontier winter has very little interest in elegance. Its preferred aesthetic is patched, smoked, practical and untired. Window openings, where they exist, are another point of compromise. Glass on the frontier is valuable and not universal. Some cabins have small panes. Others use greased paper or oiled cloth to admit a weak, cloudy light. Such coverings keep out some weather while offering little defense against deep cold. You can stand near them and feel the chill radiating inward. The light itself looks cold, as if sunshine has lost confidence. Historians generally agree that even modest amounts of glass could be prized possessions in frontier households, not only for comfort but for status. A proper glazed window was useful, but it also quietly announced that someone had managed to secure fragile, costly material at the edge of settlement. Not exactly luxury, but close enough to make neighbours notice. Inside, the floor may be packed earth or puncheons, which are split logs hewn flat on one side. Neither option is exactly famous for warmth. Earth floors can turn damp and hold cold like a grudge. Wooden floors can gape between boards and let updrafts creep through. You scatter rugs if you have them. You lay skins where feet often land. You move quickly in the morning because standing still on a cold floor feels like negotiating with punishment. Then there is the hearth, the kingdom and nuisance at the centre of winter life. A large stone or clay hearth provides heat, cooking space, and psychological reassurance, though it also produces endless ash, smoke, and sparks. You sweep constantly. Soot settles on everything. The scent of smoke lives in your sleeves, your hair, your blankets, and your bread. It is almost impossible to avoid. Visitors to old cabins often romanticize the smell of wood smoke. That is because they are visiting. They can leave, you are sleeping in it. Still, you protect the hearth carefully. The chimney must draw well enough to carry smoke out, though chimneys themselves can be made from sticks plastered with clay when stone is scarce. Such structures work, but they are not universally admired by people who prefer not to burn down. One quirky tidbit from frontier life is that some settlers referred to especially flimsy chimneys as cat and clay chimneys, built from a lattice of wood packed with mud. The phrase sounds almost playful, which is unfairly cheerful for something attached to open fire. These chimneys could function surprisingly well when maintained, but no one wise became sentimental about them. The bed is another winter project, because sleep is not restful if every night feels like camping inside a box of drafts. Bedsteads may be simple frames with ropes or slats supporting a tick stuffed with straw, husks, feathers, or whatever can be spared. You pile on blankets, quilts, skins, or cloaks. Sometimes more than one person shares warmth for plain survival rather than romance. Bodies are practical heaters. Babies are tucked close. Children burrow like small annoyed badgers. Everyone learns that the edge of a blanket can start arguments faster than philosophy. Clothing stored indoors needs attention as well. Wool is precious because it stays warm even when a little damp, though it can itch with malicious enthusiasm. Linen and hemp serve their purpose, but layers are the real defense. You dry mittens near the fire without scorching them. You check moccasins or shoes for wear. You mend stockings by poor light while your fingers resist fine work. The cabin becomes a workshop of preservation. Nothing is merely used. Everything is nursed along. Light inside the cabin is dim for much of winter. Tallow candles smoke and smell faintly of animal fat. Grease lamps can do the same. Firelight flickers across the log walls and creates a world of moving shadows. Faces look older by it. Corners seem deeper. A hanging coat can resemble an intruder for one thrilling moment when you are overtired. Frontier nerves are not weak. They are simply overworked. When the day has been full of strain and the night is full of wind. Imagination becomes an unpaid employee with entirely too much energy. The cabin must also defend against moisture, which is one of winter's more boring but effective threats. Snow tracked indoors melts. Breath and boiling water add dampness to the air. Wet clothes hung too close to the fire steam and smell strongly of wool, leather, and outside cold. Damp bedding feels miserable. Damp walls invite rot. You do not think of winter as wet until you live through it in tight quarters. Then you think of little else. Some people improvise insulation with remarkable creativity. Extra quilts hung near sleeping spaces. Bundles of dried grass stuffed into trouble spots. Crates, chests, or benches pushed against drafty walls. Curtains around beds, when cloth can be spared. Help trap warmth close to the body. This is not fancy decoration. This is engineering with blankets. You also pay attention to where food sits in relation to heat. Butter or lard can go soft near the fire and harden like stone in colder spots. Dough rises badly when the room refuses to cooperate. Water freezes where you forgot it. Salt absorbs dampness. A kitchen shelf is basically a map of tiny climatic zones. You learn each one. Near the chimney is too warm. Near the outer wall is too cold. By the door is foolish. Under the bed is sometimes useful and sometimes a trap for mice. Mice always find a way to join the conversation. They squeeze through walls, skitter across rafters, and make modest thefts from grain sacks. Cats earn their keep in winter. So do good dogs, though dogs bring mud, hair, and opinions. A cabin at night may contain the sounds of breathing people, shifting animals, settling wood, and the scratch of small determined paws in the dark. It is a strange orchestra. Not restful, perhaps, but alive. There is a scholarly debate about just how quickly frontier households could improve their cabins after first settlement. Some historians argue that many early structures remained quite crude for years because labour went first into fields, fences, and essential outbuildings. Others suggest that families often upgraded winter protection faster than older accounts imply, precisely because the first cold season taught sharp lessons. Both views have merit. The evidence varies by region, wealth, available labour, and access to sawmills or skilled help. What seems certain is that few people looked at a first cabin and thought, yes, perfect, let us change nothing. As evening comes, you inspect the room one last time with that frontier habit of preventive worry. You bank the fire, you draw bedding closer, you move a draft block with your foot, you make sure no spark has jumped where it should not. The smell of warm clay near the hearth mixes with wool, smoke, and the stale sweetness of stored grain. Your hands are rough from mud, wood, and cold water. Your shoulders ache from lifting. Yet there is a quiet satisfaction in a better sealed wall, a steadier roof, a door that closes with less complaint. Outside, the cabin may look small against the dark fields and the black edge of timber. It may look temporary, even vulnerable. Both things are true, but inside, each patched seam and stuffed crack declares a very stubborn intention. You will not make the wilderness gentle. That is far beyond your powers. You will, however, make one room less hostile. On the frontier in 1815, that is a serious achievement. Not glorious, not poetic, just precious. You lie down at last and listen to the wind rub softly along the cabin logs. The walls no longer breathe cold so freely. The fire holds a low red core. The roof keeps its counsel overhead. The room is still imperfect, of course. A little smoke lingers. One corner remains unfriendly. Your toes may still question your life choices, but the shelter around you has become tighter, wiser, more deliberate. In winter, that kind of progress feels almost tender. Morning begins in darkness again, but this time the first thought in your mind is not the fire. It is wood. How much remains near the door, how much stands stacked outside, how dry it feels, how fast it disappears. On the frontier in 1815, firewood is not a background convenience. It is the hidden measure behind almost every winter hour. Warmth, cooking, light, drying clothes, thawing fingers, heating water. Even morale itself seemed to rest on split logs and stubborn labour. You rise with that dull ache that comes from carrying heavy things too often. Your hands already remember the shape of an axe handle before they touch it. Your shoulders remember the weight of a load before the first stick leaves the ground. Wood gathering is not one task among many. In winter, it becomes a cycle with no satisfying end. The pile shrinks with a kind of magic you do not appreciate. Outside, the air feels harder now. It enters your chest cold and clean, with a faint bitter note from leafless woods and old frost. The clearing around the cabin is cluttered with the practical signs of frontier life. A chopping block, scarred and splintered, stacks of wood in uneven ranks, bark, chips, and sawdust ground into the frozen earth, a hand, sled, or drag, if you are fortunate enough to have one, The scene would almost look orderly if not for the constant truth that winter consumes order faster than you can restore it. You begin by checking the wood already cut. Dry wood has its own language. It sounds sharper when struck. It feels lighter. The grain splits more cleanly under the axe. Green wood is another matter. It resists. It smokes. It hisses in the fire like a complaint. On the frontier, choosing bad wood can mean a room full of smoke and very little heat, which is an efficient way to ruin both supper and your patience. So you sort carefully. Good hardwood, if you have it, is treasured for slow, steady burning. Oak, hickory, maple, beech. Softer woods can help start a fire, but they burn fast and leave you feeling cheated. The forest itself becomes a kind of winter storehouse, though never an easy one. Trees stand stripped and stark, their bark pale or dark against the thin light. Fallen limbs lie hidden under brush. Dead standing timber can be a gift if you find it sound and dry. But cutting it is work that fills the body completely. The axe rises, falls, bites, sticks, rises again. Each blow sends a shock through your arms. Chips fly and land on your boots. The smell of fresh-cut wood comes out bright and almost sweet. Surprisingly alive for something being reduced to fuel. It is a good smell. It does not lighten the load. You keep swinging, and the rhythm matters. Frontier labour often depends on rhythm as much as strength. Too fast and you tire early. Too slow and the day slips away. The sound carries over the clearing in regular knocks, then pauses, then resumes. Sometimes another axe answers from far off, where a neighbour works his own woodlot. That distant sound can feel oddly companionable, like a reminder that somewhere beyond the trees, another pair of hands is also trying to stay ahead of the cold. By 1815, many frontier families understood very well that wood needed to be cut far in advance, yet winter still found people scrambling. Historians generally agree that underestimating wood needs was common, especially in first years of settlement. The reasons were simple and very human. Newcomers misjudged climate, overestimated their strength, or lost time to harvest, sickness, house building, or repairs. Winter, meanwhile, never admired effort as much as results. A full day's cutting does not end with the tree on the ground. That is just the beginning. Logs must be trimmed, sectioned, split, gathered, loaded, dragged, stacked, and protected. Nothing about this process feels optional. Even the bark and smaller branches may be saved for kindling. Children can help carry chips. Older folk can sort. No one gets to look at a fallen tree and declare the problem solved. A tree becomes useful only after many smaller tasks have removed all romance from it. There is a peculiar frontier misery in handling wood with half-cold fingers. Gloves, if you have them, are bulky, worn, or damp. Bare hands offer dexterity and regret. Bark scrapes the skin. Splinters find their way in. A frozen log can sting when you lift it. Rope stiffens in the cold. Iron tools punish skin instantly if touched carelessly. You grow intimate with textures that no civilized salon conversation would ever praise. The roughness of cut ends, the flaky looseness of bark, the hard, smooth chill of a tool left outside too long. At times you use a hand sled, if snow or hard ground allows. At times you drag branches or awkward lengths of timber by brute force and a quantity of muttered determination. Horses or oxen help if a family owns them, and if those animals are strong enough for winter pulling. But animals need feed, rest, and protection too. Nothing on the frontier is free. Every advantage asks something back. One quirky tidbit from early American winter life is that some households valued certain stumps, roots, and knotty pieces for the intense heat they could provide, even if they were awkward to split. Fat pine, where available, was especially prized for starting fires because of its resin. It caught quickly and burned with a bright, eager flame. Useful, yes. Also rather dramatic, like a small, overconfident actor in a play otherwise performed by more dependable hardwood logs. When the wind rises, cutting becomes sharper work. Cold air sweeps under your coat and steals sweat the moment it appears. That can be dangerous. The frontier teaches an unpleasant lesson about sweat in winter. Too much effort leaves your shirt damp. damp cloth cools fast. The body that felt hot while swinging an axe may chill cruelly during the walk back with a load. So you pace yourself as best you can, though pacing yourself and getting enough wood rarely become close friends. You notice sounds differently while working, the hollow thud when a log lands, the crack of fibres when a split finally runs true, the faint rattle of leafless branches overhead, a crow somewhere in the distance, your own breathing, louder than you would prefer. When snow comes later and thickens over the ground, these sounds change again. Axes sound duller, steps soften. The whole woodlot feels muffled, as if the forest itself is listening. Wood must also be stored wisely. A fine stack directly exposed to weather is simply a neat arrangement of future disappointment. You choose a place where logs can stay raised off wet ground and shed snow, or rain as well as possible. Stacking has its own satisfaction. Rows line up, ends balance, pieces interlock, disorder turns briefly into structure. Yet even here anxiety persists. Is it enough? Is it close enough to the cabin? Is the kindling sheltered? What will you burn if storms keep you indoors for days? This question shadows every trip. Inside the cabin, the cost of warmth becomes visible. The fire consumes what your body has spent hours providing. You place a log on glowing coals and watch it blacken, catch, settle, and become heat. There is comfort in that transformation, but also a strange humility. A whole section of your day can vanish in 40 minutes of cheerful flame. You begin to understand why winter conversation so often circles back to wood. It is not obsession, it is arithmetic. Cooking increases the demand. A pot kept simmering uses fuel. Bread baking uses fuel. Water heating uses fuel. Drying soaked stockings by the hearth uses fuel. Even small indulgences, such as warming a stone for cold feet or keeping a room slightly more comfortable for a sick child, consume wood. The hearth never stops asking. It is a beloved tyrant. Smoke tells you how well you are managing. Dry wood gives a cleaner, steadier fire. Wet wood sours the air and paints the room with smoke that stings the eyes and leaves a bitter taste at the back of the throat. There are few frontier disappointments quite as immediate as working hard all day, then bringing in wood that refuses to burn properly. The room grows stuffy, then cold, then irritable. Everyone looks at the fire as if it has committed a moral offence. Scholars still debate the exact scale of woodland depletion around some early frontier settlements, because local conditions varied so much. In some regions, timber seemed endless to newcomers, at least for a time. In others, the most convenient woodlots were stripped quickly, forcing longer trips and harder hauling. The issue was not merely the existence of trees, but the existence of accessible, suitable trees near enough to be useful in the worst weather. A forest on the horizon may look abundant. It does not look so generous when you must drag half of it uphill. The body pays for every mistake. Swing the axe poorly and your back tells you so. Carry too much and your knees protest on the frozen ground. Neglect to bring in extra wood before night and you face a mean little journey in darkness, with the wind in your face and your temper somewhere behind you in the snow. Frontier life often punishes laziness, but just as often it punishes optimism. You keep learning the difference. By afternoon, the smell of the woodpile clings to you. Bark dust, resin, cold air, sweat dried into wool. Your palms feel thickened and sore. Fine cracks in the skin may open near the knuckles, stinging when washed. This is one of those details old recollections sometimes mention only in passing. But it matters. Winter is not a grand, heroic struggle every hour. Often it is simply the repeated irritation of the body by cold, roughness, weight, and dryness. You pause now and then to listen to the land. It is strange how a frontier winter can feel both crowded with tasks and empty of movement. No insect buzz, little bird song, fewer rustlings in the brush. Even the sky appears larger when the trees are bare. Under that broad pale dome, your woodpile seems small. So does your cabin. So do you. There is a harsh honesty in that scale. And still, people made rituals of it. A certain place for the axe at day's end. A practiced way to stack the best logs nearest the door. A habit of bringing in one last armful before dusk no matter how tired you feel. These routines steady the mind. They make necessity feel almost ceremonial. You may not control the weather, but you can control whether tomorrow begins with dry kindling within reach. As evening settles, you carry in another load and set it near the hearth. The room immediately smells better for it, fresh wood brightening the heavy air of smoke and cooking. Flame catches, shadows move up the wall, the ache in your arms deepens as they finally rest. Supper may be plain, but it tastes larger after chopping in the cold. Even hot water feels meaningful. Warmth on the face feels like forgiveness, yet the woodpile outside waits in your thoughts. It never quite leaves them. A frontier person in winter sees logs not as scenery but as time. That stack is 3 weeks. That corner is 5 mornings. Those chips are tomorrow's first spark. Each piece measures a future moment when cold will press at the walls and the fire will answer. No wonder people guarded wood with such seriousness. No wonder theft of it could provoke real fury. To take another person's wood in winter was to steal heat already promised to their bones. Night comes fully at last. You bank the fire and judge the remaining pile by lamplight or flame. It looks acceptable. It also looks too small. Both things can be true. You settle near the hearth and let the warmth creep back into your hands. Outside, the dark fields and timber hold their silence. Inside, the cabin breathes with low fire and tired bodies. Tomorrow will ask for more cutting, more hauling, more stacking. It always does. That is the plain, stubborn fact of winter on the frontier. Firewood is never finished. It is pursued, earned, burned, and pursued again. And in that relentless cycle, you discover a quiet frontier truth. Survival is rarely one great act of courage. More often, it is an axe lifted once more into the cold morning air. By the deep middle of winter, hunger becomes less dramatic and more constant. It does not always arrive as a roaring pain. More often it settles into the day as a quiet calculation. You look at a barrel and wonder how low it has fallen. You lift a sack and judge its weight with one hand. You scrape the bottom of a crock and think, not yet, but soon. On the American frontier in 1815, food is not simply stored, it is watched, measured, stretched, guarded, and mentally divided into futures. The cabin smells different when provisions are running low. A well-supplied room carries layers of grain dust, smoke, cured meat, dried herbs, and the sour, pleasant note of apples or cabbage keeping in cold corners. A leaner room smells plainer. The air is more ash than a supper. The shelves look wider. Containers make that discouraging hollow sound when moved. Even before real shortage begins, you feel the shape of it. A frontier winter diet often depends on what could be preserved in autumn, and what survives storage without spoiling. Cornmeal is common because maize grows broadly and stores well when dried. Beans hold their place too, small durable things that reward patience with nourishment. Salt pork appears again and again, because salting remains one of the most dependable ways to keep meat through the cold months. Flour, if available, is precious. Smoked meat, dried apples, squash, pumpkins, turnips, onions, and cabbages may all play their part depending on region, harvest, and luck. The problem is not that food is absent. The problem is that winter is long and appetite does not negotiate. You begin the morning with a meal designed less to delight than to steady. A pot of mush or porridge thickens slowly near the fire. The steam carries the mild, comforting smell of grain. You stir with a wooden spoon and watch lumps dissolve. Perhaps there is a little milk if a cow is still giving. Perhaps a scrap of molasses. Perhaps nothing but salt. Even plain hot food feels generous when the air beyond the hearth remains sharp enough to hurt. Cornmeal is a loyal servant, though not an exciting one. It can become mush, johnny cake, hoe cake, or bread. Each version trying hard to disguise how often the same ingredient has returned. Frontier cooking contains a great deal of practical invention, but even invention has limits. Day after day, familiar flavors press upon you until novelty itself begins to feel like a memory. One quirky tidbit from early American food life is that people sometimes made surprisingly creative use of whatever remained, from dried pumpkin worked into breads to coffee substitutes brewed from roasted grains, chicory, or other local stand-ins. The result could be nourishing, passable, or frankly suspicious. Warm, however, still counted for a lot. The arithmetic of meat is harder. Salt pork hangs in your mind even when it's hanging in the smokehouse or packed away in a barrel. Each cut removed changes the future. Too generous a slice today becomes regret in late February. Too little leaves working bodies weak. You stand with knife in hand and judge not only the meal before you but the invisible meals ahead. Fat is valuable. Lean is valuable. Bones are valuable. Nothing is casual. The smell of salt pork cooking is heavy and rich, enough to make the whole room feel fuller than it is. Grease spatters softly. Smoke rises. The meat edges toward crispness if you are careful, though often it is simply heated and rationed. Salt sits hard on the tongue. After months of preserved food, fresh flavors begin to feel almost mythical. You dream of green things without saying so aloud. Hunting may supplement the stores, but it is not a reliable fairy godmother waiting in the snowy trees. Game grows scarcer near settled areas. Weather complicates travel, and a hunter may spend hours burning energy for uncertain reward. Deer, rabbit, squirrel, wild turkey, or waterfowl might all matter, depending on place and season. A successful hunt brings relief and a flurry of work. An unsuccessful one brings cold feet and a poor temper. Powder and shot are too valuable for waste, so every outing carries pressure. You also think about the root cellar, if there is one, or about the coolest protected corner where vegetables have been kept. Potatoes are useful where they are available, though not every frontier household depends on them equally. Turnips, parsnips, onions, and cabbages can last, but only if storage remains cold enough to preserve and not so cold that everything freezes solid. Apples soften. Squash spoils from one hidden bruise. A single rotten vegetable can threaten its neighbours like a bad influence in close quarters. This is why inspection becomes routine. You kneel in dim light, fingers cold, sorting produce by touch as much as sight. A good onion feels firm, papery, dependable. A failing one goes slick or soft. Cabbage leaves may blacken at the edges. Apples wrinkle and sweeten strangely as they age. The smells tell you things too. Good stored food smells earthy, sharp, or faintly sweet. Spoilage announces itself with sourness, damp rot, or the stale breath of a cellar that has lost the argument. Historians generally agree that preserving enough food for winter was among the most labour-intensive tasks of frontier household management. Drying, salting, smoking, pickling, grinding, storing, and guarding provisions took months of effort before the season even began. That labour often fell heavily on women's shoulders, though households worked as units and local arrangements varied. The frontier liked to advertise masculine heroics with axes and rifles, but a winter table owed just as much to kettles, crocks, careful hands, and the unglamorous genius of making food last. Bread itself is a small test of patience. Flour may be coarse, cornmeal may dominate, yeast may be uncertain, the room may be too cold for dough to rise properly. You place it near the hearth, turn it, cover it, coax it, and hope. Some loaves come out heavy enough to stun a burglar. Others are better. In a hard winter, nobody wastes much time criticising texture. A warm piece of bread, even dense bread, sends a softness through the room that no elegant feast could improve upon. Still, appetite has moods. There are evenings when everyone eats quickly and quietly, grateful for what is there. There are other evenings when monotony sours the spirit. Beans again, corn again, salt again. A person can become deeply offended by another spoonful of the perfectly adequate. This is one reason frontier humour matters. A joke at supper may not improve the food, but it may stop it from feeling like a personal enemy. Children feel winter hunger in their own vivid way. They ask for more. They look into pots. They hover near the table. Adults make choices they do not always explain. A smaller second helping here, a saved crust there. Sometimes the strongest worker gets extra because labour demands it. Sometimes the sick or youngest are favoured. Fairness in a frontier cabin is not always equal portions. It is a shifting, rough morality shaped by need. The social customs around food become sharper too. Guests are still fed when possible, because hospitality remains a serious value in many early American communities. Yet every shared meal costs something tangible in winter. To offer food is generous. To receive it is no small thing. Neighbours may exchange favours, ingredients, news, or occasional help. But no household enters the hard months assuming abundance will float in from next door. Everyone is keeping an eye on their own shelves. A scholarly uncertainty lingers over exactly how varied frontier diets really were across different regions and social classes. Because surviving records often come from people who wrote selectively and remembered strategically. Some memoirists emphasize hardship, perhaps truthfully, perhaps dramatically. Others mention surprising variety from local hunting, fishing, trading, or foraging. Researchers continue to debate how representative these accounts are. What remains clear is that even the more fortunate households lived with stronger seasonality than most modern people can easily imagine. Winter narrowed the menu. When stores thin, thrift becomes almost ceremonial. Bones are boiled for broth. Grease is saved. Stale bread is crumbled into other dishes. Bits of meat flavour a whole pot rather than serving as proud individual portions. Vinegar, salt, and smoke lend force where freshness is absent. Dry beans simmer for hours until the room smells hearty whether or not the meal truly is. A kettle on the hearth can make scarcity smell comforting, which is one of domestic life's more tender deceptions. You become aware of sound during meals, the scrape of wooden spoon against bowl, the creak of a bench, the low bubble of a pot settling back from the fire, someone chewing slowly, someone swallowing water before speaking. In prosperous times, such sounds fade into the background. In winter, they become part of the mood, small household music that marks order and continuation. The meal happened, the food held. The day moved forward. Taste grows more meaningful when variety shrinks. A pinch of dried herb can brighten an entire dish. Onion, when available, feels almost luxurious. Molasses or maple sugar can turn plain food into a brief celebration. Even pickles, sharp and cold from storage, bring a kind of surprise to the mouth. Frontier households often treasured such contrasts, not because they were fancy, but because they reminded the senses that life contained more than salt and starch. Of course, food is also vulnerable to theft by creatures who have their own winter plans. Mice chew sacks. Rats, where they are present, behave with appalling confidence. Insects may trouble stores less in the cold, but damage done earlier still matters. Cats patrol with varying levels of seriousness. Containers are tied, hung, covered, wedged, or elevated. This too is part of the winter routine. A person who loses grain to vermin feels a special kind of outrage, because the loss is so petty in scale and so large in consequence. You may also trade when circumstances allow. A neighbour with extra meal might need tallow. Someone with smoked venison may want cloth or labour in return. Frontier economies are rarely neat. Coin exists, but barter and mutual obligation often fill the gaps, especially where markets are distant. These exchanges help households survive, though they also require trust, reputation, and timing. As evening gathers, as supper becomes both nourishment and judgment. Was the portion too large? Could the cabbage have waited 2 more days? Should the last better cut of meat have been saved for illness, company, or morale? You chew and think ahead. Winter trains the mind to eat in 2 times at once, tasting what is on the spoon while also imagining the empty shelf that might follow. And yet there can be comfort here too. Steam rising from a bowl into cold dim air, the smell of bread cooling on a board, beans thick with pork in a pot blackened by long use, hands warming around food before the first bite. Hunger may be disciplined, but it is still answered, and that answer brings a hush to the room that feels close to peace. You finish, scrape bowls clean, save what little remains, and cover the stores once more. The shelves look no fuller than they did before. Perhaps they look a little meaner, but for one more night the cabin has fed its people. On the frontier in 1815, that fact carries weight. Food is not merely what keeps the body going. It is evidence that foresight worked, that labour held, that the long winter has not yet taken command of the table. Such victories are small. They are also everything. The worst part of winter sickness on the frontier is how ordinary it begins. A cough at dusk. A child too quiet by morning. A headache blamed on smoke. A chill that lingers after chores should have warmed the body. Nothing announces itself with a trumpet. Trouble usually enters the cabin in a small, unremarkable way, then settles in among the blankets, the cooking pots, and the stored food as if it belongs there. By 1815, people on the American frontier know illness well, though knowing it does not mean mastering it. They understand that cold weakens, dampness lingers, smoke irritates, and close rooms share more than warmth. They know fevers can spread through a household with alarming speed. They know some ailments pass and some do not. They know useful remedies, cherished remedies, and remedies that probably comfort more than cure. Winter turns all of this knowledge into daily vigilance. The cabin itself can make sickness worse while trying to protect against it. The fire burns, which means smoke. Even a well-built hearth lets some of it drift into the room. A poorer chimney does worse. The air catches in your throat. Eyes water. Babies cough. Blankets, clothing, and hair all keep the smell. The room feels warm near the fire, but corners stay cold and damp. Wet boots steam by the hearth. Mittens thaw. Snow melts off hems and drips onto the floor. Breath, boiling water. And bodies add moisture to the air. It is a strange mixture of heat and chill, of dryness on the skin and dampness in the lungs. You notice first how a sick person changes the sound of the cabin. A healthy room is full of movement. Wood set down, water poured, a spoon against a pot, low conversation, work noises. With illness, the music shifts. There is more stillness, then a cough, then another, a restless turn in bed, the small clink of a cup being offered. The fire suddenly sounds louder because the person who usually fills the silence now lies quiet. Winter sickness can mean many things. Colds, influenza-like fevers, lung infections, bowel complaints, ague, and other poorly understood ailments all move through frontier communities under names that vary from place to place. Medical language in 1815 is not the language you would use now, and even skilled physicians often explain disease through theories that mix careful observation with mistaken ideas. Bleeding, blistering, purging, sweating, herbal decoctions, poultices, and tonics all have their place in the medicine chest of the era, whether or not the patient benefits. Historians generally agree that access to trained doctors on the frontier was inconsistent at best. Many families relied first on household knowledge, local healers, or neighbours before outside medical help could be reached. That delay matters. Distance is always part of the illness. A doctor may be miles away over bad roads, swollen streams, frozen ground, or drifted paths. Even sending for help requires a healthy person, a horse if one is available, time, and luck with weather. So when someone grows ill, you do not simply ask what the sickness is. You also ask whether the cabin can carry it alone. The smells of care become part of the day. Steeped herbs, hot vinegar, onion, broth, wet wool drying by the fire, a rag warmed in water and wrung out for a forehead, tallow smoke from a candle burning late, sweat trapped in blankets. The scent of sickness itself is hard to describe, but it is real enough in close rooms, a mix of heat, stale breath, linens, and anxious tending. A child with fever is one kind of fear. An adult who cannot rise for chores is another. The frontier is not designed for inactivity. Every person holds several tasks in the day, and when one falls ill, those tasks spill onto the others. Water still must be carried. Animals still must be fed. Firewood still must come in. Food still must be cooked. The sick need watching on top of it all. Exhaustion becomes a second illness moving quietly through the household. There are remedies, of course. Some are practical. Warmth, rest, broth, water, extra coverings, and keeping the patient near but not too near the fire. Some are inherited through family tradition or local custom. Herbal teas made from horehound, mint, sassafras, or willow, mustard plasters, goose grease rubbed on the chest, spirits mixed with honey or herbs, camphor, vinegar, garlic, and any number of household substances pressed into service with deep sincerity. One quirky tidbit from frontier domestic medicine is how often common kitchen ingredients crossed over into treatment. The line between pantry and pharmacy was sometimes little more than confidence in a spoon. You heat stones at the hearth and wrap them to warm the bed. You turn pillows. You shift blankets to prevent chilling. You test a forehead with the back of your hand, though every hand on the frontier seems half cold most of the season and not entirely trustworthy as an instrument. You watch the patient breathe. In winter, breathing becomes a thing people hear with their hearts. There is another problem that cold weather brings. Ventilation is unpleasant. Fresh air helps, but opening the door or window covering can turn the room cruel in minutes. So families compromise. A little air when they can bear it. A little more when smoke becomes too thick. Not enough. Often. The cabin keeps warmth by holding everything else as well, and so coughs echo in a room that feels at once sheltered and stale. Children are especially vulnerable. Their bodies run hot with fever and then seem suddenly fragile in the long night. They ask strange questions when tired. They cry. They whimper. Sometimes they become heavy and still in a way that frightens everyone. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, older siblings, all take turns with them. A family may measure out home remedies carefully, then pray over what none of those remedies can guarantee. Sleep comes in fragments to the healthy because somebody must keep listening. Adults often try to remain useful too long. A man may insist he can still split a little wood while a cough rattles in his chest. A woman may continue cooking and mending through chills until she cannot stand without swaying. Pride is common, so is necessity. The frontier does not reward either of them with special lenience. When illness finally forces a person down, it often means the condition has already worsened. Scholars still argue over how frontier families interpreted the causes of winter illness in daily life. Many accepted older ideas about imbalance, bad air, or the dangers of sudden chill. Others noticed patterns that pointed toward contagion, without understanding germs in the modern sense. The records are full of practical observation mixed with uncertain theory. People saw that crowded cabins and shared bedding spread sickness. They also blamed wet feet, drafts, moon phases, or badly timed exposure. Often they were partly right and partly wrong at the same time, which is a very human condition. The emotional atmosphere of a sick cabin is unlike ordinary winter quiet. Work continues, but voices lower, laughter retreats, firelight seems more solemn, even the useful noises sound cautious, as if no one wishes to disturb the fragile balance between discomfort and danger. If neighbours hear of the sickness, they may help with food, errands, or messages, though they also weigh the risk of entering a troubled house. Compassion and caution live side by side. When a doctor does come, the event can feel momentous. Hoofbeats in frozen ground, a knock at the door, a figure wrapped against the cold carrying instruments, bottles, powders, authority, and uncertainty in roughly equal measure. Some physicians are experienced and observant. Others are less reassuring. Their treatments can be harsh. Bloodletting was still common in many settings, and purgatives were widely used. Whether such measures helped depended greatly on the illness and the practitioner. A patient too weak for heroic treatment might endure it anyway because doing something felt better than doing nothing. And then there is simple nursing, which often matters most. Sips of water, a clean cloth, turning the patient, feeding them slowly, keeping the fire steady through the night, taking over their work without letting the whole household slide into disorder. This labour rarely appears in Grand Frontier legend, but it holds families together. Winter survival is not just strength with an axe, it is tenderness under pressure. The body of the caretaker changes too. Eyes burn from too little sleep and too much smoke. Hands chap from repeated washing in cold water and lye soap. Shoulders tighten. Thoughts grow strange after midnight, when firelight pulses low and the patient mutters in fever or falls too silent between breaths. Every creak in the cabin feels amplified. Every improvement seems miraculous. Every setback lands heavily. Food for the sick becomes a category of its own. Thin broth, soft bread, milk if there is any to spare, warm teas, gruel, maybe a little cider or weak spirits if that is the household custom. Not much, perhaps, but enough to feel purposeful. The smell of these simple preparations drifts through the room and marks the day in careful acts. To nourish someone who has no appetite is a quiet challenge. To watch them swallow a few spoonfuls can feel like a victory no one outside the cabin would understand. Some illnesses pass. Fever breaks, sweat cools, the cough loosens, a face regains colour. The patient asks for proper food again or complains about the taste of medicine, which is one of the loveliest signs in the world. Work can begin to sort itself back into familiar hands. Relief spreads through the room so tangibly that even the walls seem to relax. But not every winter sickness ends kindly. Frontier families know this too well. Death in winter brings its own hard practicalities, and even when loss does not come, the fear of it can sit in the room for days after danger passes. People speak softly. They look at one another longer. A recovered child playing by the hearth may seem brighter than before simply because silence had almost taken that place. By evening, when the sick have settled and the fire burns low, you feel how narrow the line can be between ordinary discomfort and real crisis. The cabin that shelters also confines. The same walls that keep out the wind hold in smoke, dampness, and worry. Yet within those same walls, care gathers itself. Someone warms water again. Someone folds another cloth. Someone sits nearby just to listen to breathing. That is winter medicine on the frontier in 1815 at its most honest. Not certainty, not mastery, not some neat triumph of old-time wisdom over hardship. It is watchfulness, improvisation, endurance, an affection expressed through chores, a fevered forehead cooled, a fire fed one more time, a blanket tucked close. In a season ruled by cold, such acts become a form of shelter all their own. Animals suffer winter with you, but they do not do it politely. They stamp, snort, bawl, shiver, crowd, chew, kick at frozen ground, and stare with a kind of blunt expectation that can feel deeply unfair before sunrise. On the American frontier in 1815, livestock are not quaint background details standing decoratively in snow. They are labour, meat, milk, leather, transport, manure, trade, and future security on 4 legs. If they weaken badly, the whole household feels the loss. So even when the cold makes your own bones complain, you rise and go out to 10 creatures who would very much like breakfast now. The morning air has a raw bite that seems to sharpen every smell. Hay carries a dry, sweet scent. Frozen manure smells duller but not absent. Animal breath hangs in white clouds. The yard is marked by hoofprints, trampled straw, and the stiff edges of ice where water spilled the day before. Chickens mutter irritably in their coop. A pig grunts with deep, offended force, as if winter were a personal insult. Cattle shift their weight and watch you approach with the grave expression of beings who do not care for speeches. Feeding animals in winter is a lesson in planning that begins months before the snow. Hay must be cut, dried, stored, and protected. Corn may be set aside for feed when there's enough to spare. Fodder of various kinds, blades, stalks, leaves, whatever local practice allows, becomes precious once pasture disappears under frost and snow. Historians generally agree that a frontier family's ability to overwinter livestock depended less on affection than on summer labour and autumn foresight. You cannot improvise a haystack in January. That does not stop people from trying to stretch one. You carry feed with aching arms and feel the dust of dry hay catch in your nose. Fine particles cling to wool sleeves and make your skin itch. The barn, stable, shed, or lean to where animals are kept offers some shelter from the wind. But it is rarely warm in a generous sense. It is only warmer than outside. The wooden boards smell of old straw, damp earth, and livestock. Hooves rustle. Chains or harness rings knock softly. Somewhere a cow tears at fodder with that slow, determined sound that always seems calmer than human eating. Cows matter, especially if they are still milking. Though winter often reduces production, a cow gives more than milk. She gives cream, butter, buttermilk, perhaps cheese, nourishment for children, and a little easing of the monotony at table. But she also asks for feed when feed is scarce. and care when care is already in demand. Milking in winter is a sensory education. Your hands meet the warmth of the udder in freezing air. The bucket smells of clean metal or wood, and then of fresh milk. Rich and faintly grassy even in the cold season. Steam rises from the animal's body. Your fingers hurt at first, then settle into the work. A horse or ox is another category of worry. Working animals are power made visible. They haul timber, drag sleds, carry people, break ground when spring returns. Losing one is not merely sad. It can be economically bruising in a way the whole household feels for years. Horses need grain if you can give it, along with hay, water, grooming, and shelter from the worst exposure. Oxen are hardy, patient creatures, but patience is not the same as invincibility. Winter strips strength from any animal that falls behind on feed. Watering livestock is one of those chores modern people tend to underestimate until they imagine hauling or breaking ice twice a day in a hard season. Water freezes in troughs, buckets crust over. The path to the spring or creek turns slick, rutted or buried. If animals are led to water, the trip itself can be difficult. If water is carried to them, your shoulders remember every bucket. One quirky frontier tidbit is how often people praised a good spring located conveniently near the house and stock shelter, as if speaking of a reliable friend. In winter, that praise made perfect sense. Water near at hand was not luxury, it was mercy. You break ice with a tool and hear the brittle crack echo in the morning quiet. Chunks shift and knock together like broken crockery. The cold leaps into your gloves or bare fingertips. A horse lowers its head eagerly. A cow drinks with steady urgency. Chickens need water too, though keeping it from freezing feels like a small repetitive argument with nature. Even pigs, those shameless opportunists of the yard, become vulnerable in severe weather when feed thins and mud turns to iron. Shelter for animals varies widely on the frontier. Some families have rough barns or sheds. Others make do with brush shelters, pens, simple roofed structures, or windbreaks built from rails, logs, or stacked fodder. A well-sheltered animal loses less heat and wastes less energy fighting the weather. That matters when every mouthful of feed counts. You spread straw or leaves where you can so bodies do not lie directly on frozen ground. Bedding smells sweet at first, then heavy as it mixes with damp and manure, it must be refreshed often enough to matter, though doing so creates yet another task in a season already overrun with them. The sounds of winter stock care create their own rough music, a horse stamping in a stall, a cow lowing low and deep, chickens fussing over grain, the wet chew of hay, the squeak of leather straps stiff with cold, the scrape of a shovel. These noises announce continuity. They tell you the animals are still eating, still standing, still part of the household economy. Silence in the barn is rarely comforting. Animals also test your patience in ways that would be amusing if they were not so inconvenient. A pig pushes through where it should not. A cow kicks over a bucket. Chickens manage to appear surprised by weather they have now experienced for weeks. A horse develops a mysterious talent for dropping hay exactly where it can be trampled and wasted. Frontier people surely loved their animals at times, but affection and irritation lived side by side, both entirely sincere. There is also the matter of butchering. Some animals are winter stores in waiting, and difficult decisions surround them. A hog fattened well may become meat, lard, and useful scraps that sustain a household through cold months. Poultry may be reduced when feed runs short. The timing matters. Slaughter too early and you lose a living reserve. Wait too long and the animal consumes precious food. Nothing about this calculation feels light. It ties appetite to management in a very direct way. Scholars still debate how many frontier households manage to keep a full complement of livestock through especially severe winters, because records differ by region, wealth, and weather. Some sources suggest high losses in harsher years, especially among newly settled families without strong barns or enough fodder. Other accounts show surprising resilience where hay meadows, corn harvests, and local knowledge supported better planning. The broad truth seems plain enough. Winter did not judge households by intention, it judged them by what they had actually put by. Sheep, where they are kept, represent another form of hope. Wool matters deeply in a cold world. A flock offers future cloth, stockings, blankets, and trade value, though sheep themselves can be delicate under bad conditions and vulnerable to predators. You watch them closely. Their breath mists in the cold. Their wool smells earthy and oily. Snow clings to them. They seem sturdy until suddenly they're not, which is a frontier lesson repeated across species. Dogs occupy a different place altogether. A good dog is alarm system, hunting companion, guard, scavenger, and emotional presence. Dogs hear what you do not. They bark at strangers, prowl around the edges of the clearing, and curl near the hearth with the shameless confidence of creatures who know they are useful. Yet even dogs need food, and winter can make that a serious matter. An idle dog eats. A working dog earns. Frontier households knew the difference clearly. Cats. Meanwhile, patrol grain stores and sleep in impossible comfort. Their contribution is real, even if their attitude suggests they believe the household exists to support their mission. In winter, their warm fur and quiet presence near the fire can soften a room. Also, they kill mice, which excuses a great deal of arrogance. Children often help with these chores, learning early that animals are not toys and not abstractions. They carry scraps, scatter grain, fetch water, hold pails, gather eggs when any can still be found, and learn where not to stand near a hoof. A child may name a calf and still watch adults speak calmly about its future use. This is not cruelty. It is frontier clarity, though no doubt hearts sometimes rebelled against it in private. The smell of the barn or shelter follows you back to the cabin, hay dust in your sleeves, leather on your hands, a faint sour warmth from animal bodies that somehow clings even in cold air. You come indoors and the house smells of smoke and cooking again, but the outside work stays with you. Caring for animals means carrying their needs in your thoughts constantly. Did the mare seem off her feed? Is the cow coughing? Will the hens keep laying at all? Is there enough hay if the snow deepens? As the day fades, you make a second round. This is often the harder one. Light drains from the sky, the air grows meaner, your body is already tired. Yet evening care matters because winter nights are long and punishing. You check latches, you throw down more fodder, you make sure water is not entirely lost to ice. You listen to the shifting bodies settle into straw. Their warmth fills the enclosure in a way no empty shed ever could. That warmth matters beyond sentiment. Animal bodies generate heat, and many frontier shelters depended on keeping stock close, sometimes very close, for that reason. People have long argued over how near animals were housed to human living space in various settings, and practices differed. But necessity often made neighbours of species that might not have chosen one another socially. The resulting atmosphere was practical, fragrant, and not remotely delicate. Night finally closes over the yard. The animals are fed as well as circumstances permit. The barn or pen holds its dim life of breathing, shifting and waiting. You stand for a moment in the cold and hear them settle. A horse blows softly through its nose. A cow moves in straw. A chicken rustles onto a perch. These are humble sounds, but they carry reassurance. The household is not only the people in the cabin, it extends into the dark shelter where the animals endure their own version of winter. On the frontier in 1815 that shared endurance means everything. Livestock are wealth, yes, but also continuity. They pull, nourish, clothe, fertilize, breed, and barter the future into being. To keep them alive through winter is to protect spring before spring exists. So you close the gate, lift the bucket, and head back toward the smoky light of the cabin, knowing that tomorrow the animals will ask again, and rightly so. Survival, after all, is rarely a solitary profession. Then comes the kind of weather that makes all your earlier worries seem almost polite. A hard storm on the frontier does not simply cover the ground, it rearranges the world. Paths vanish, fences sink, trees blur into white shapes. Familiar distances become guesses, and guesses become dangerous very quickly. In 1815, with no ploughed roads, no telegraph warnings, and no quick rescue if something goes wrong, a blizzard or heavy winter storm is not scenery. It is confusion made visible. The day often begins with signs that seem ordinary until they gather into a pattern. The air turns strangely still. Sound carries too clearly, then not at all. The sky lowers into a dull grey lid. The smell outside shifts. Less of wood smoke and frozen earth, more of wet mineral cold waiting to become snow. Chickens fuss earlier than usual. A horse may toss its head. You find yourself looking at the horizon more often, as though it owes you an explanation. When the storm finally arrives, it can begin with softness. A few flakes drifting lazily across the yard, then more, then wind. Snow starts to move sideways. The cabin wall takes the first hard hiss of it. Bare branches rub and clatter. Light fades long before evening. The whole clearing loses its edges and turns into a pale, unsettled blur. It is impressive for about 1 minute, and then practical concerns take command. You bring in what still sits outside. More wood, always more wood. Water if it can be had. Tools that would be miserable to dig out later. Anything loose near the cabin that might disappear under drifts or be flung about by wind. The door begins to matter in a new way now. Every time it opens, snow swirls in and the room flinches. Cold hits your face like a wet cloth. You hurry because storms make ordinary movements costly. Inside, the cabin shrinks psychologically. The same walls that felt modest now feel necessary. The fire becomes an anchor point. Everyone notices where they are in relation to it. Wet outer garments steam and drip. Boots leave slush that melts into cold puddles on the floor. The smell of damp wool rises heavily near the hearth. Smoke, if the wind presses wrong against the chimney, may gust back into the room and sting your eyes until tears come. Storm air has a talent for making all domestic work more troublesome at once. The sound is one of the hardest things to forget. Wind does not merely blow around a frontier cabin in a storm. It scrapes, moans, rattles, and thumps. It pushes against the logs. It finds some loose bit of roof or shutter and worries at it with endless patience. Snow striking the wall has a dry, whispering force. Branches knock. Somewhere outside, something metal or wooden may tap irregularly, and every such sound invites concern. Is it harmless? Is it damage beginning? You listen because there is little else you can do. Storms also alter the quality of darkness. A clear winter night can be sharp and starry, with moonlight on snow bright enough to guide a careful step. A storm night is different. It presses close. Even if the world beyond the window opening is white, it is a blind white, full of moving flakes and uncertain depth. Step outside with a lantern and the flame trembles, while the light bounces uselessly off the snow, making distance impossible to read. A person can stand only a short way from the cabin and lose the shape of it. That is why people feared disorientation so much. Historians generally agree that winter storms on the frontier were dangerous not only because of cold exposure, but because they erased the landmarks settlers depended on. Trails, tree lines, stumps, creek banks, and fence corners all disappear under drifting snow. A neighbour's house that seems near on a clear day may become unreachable or invisible in a storm. There are many accounts from early American winters of people becoming lost within alarmingly short distances from shelter. The landscape does not need to be vast to become bewildering. It only needs to be white enough. One quirky tidbit from frontier life is that some households used ropes, marked paths, or deliberately placed poles between key points such as cabin, barn, or spring in areas prone to deep snow and poor visibility. It sounds almost nautical. A little land-bound version of storm seamanship. In severe weather, that kind of practical caution could make the difference between a cold inconvenience and a tragedy. You do not rely on memory when memory itself is covered in snow. A storm also changes your sense of time. Tasks that usually take minutes stretch into awkward campaigns. Fetching wood from the stack becomes a battle with drifted ground and blowing snow. Reaching the animal shelter means leaning into the wind, one arm shielding your face, boots sinking unpredictably. Even opening a gate can become a stiff-handed struggle against frozen latches and packed snow. Small chores return you to the cabin with burning cheeks, wet hems, and the odd feeling that the outdoors has personally rebuked you. The animals feel the storm too. Horses grow restless, cattle bunch together, chickens huddle and mutter, dogs may bark sharply at gusts or strange noises. then retreat to whatever sheltered corner they can claim. Their unease feeds yours. A quiet barn can be worrying, but so can a noisy one. In heavy weather, you keep listening for the difference between ordinary shifting and real distress. Food tastes different during a storm, though the ingredients may not change. Hot broth seems richer. Bread feels more important. Even plain beans carry more comfort when the wind is pushing at the walls. The room smells strongly of smoke, wet clothes, and whatever is warming on the hearth. Steam clouds the air a little. Faces shine in firelight. Hands remain close to bowls or cups longer than usual, reluctant to surrender heat back to the room. Conversation changes as well. People talk less, or they talk in bursts. Some listen to the storm between sentences. Some grow more talkative from nerves and tell stories half to pass the time, half to prove that the cabin still belongs to human beings and not to weather. Frontier storytelling often carried weather memory inside it. This was the storm that took a roof. The winter a river froze thick enough for wagons. The night someone followed a dog home in near blindness. Such stories were not idle entertainment. They were warning labels wrapped in anecdote. Scholars still debate how much later memoirs exaggerated the drama of frontier storms, because bad weather makes for vivid writing and human memory likes contrast. Yet weather records, local histories, and repeated patterns across many accounts confirm that severe winter storms could isolate families for days and sometimes leave lasting damage. The exact details vary, but the underlying truth remains steady. Snow and wind could cut a household off from travel, trade, medical help, and neighbours with remarkable speed. That isolation has a mental texture all its own. The cabin becomes a world. The storm beyond it feels almost oceanic, a moving force with no face and no interest in your plans. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot speed it along. You can only tend fire, ration effort, and wait. This waiting is not peaceful in the cozy storybook sense. It is active. You keep checking the roofline, the door, the chimney, the bedding near drafts, the food set by the hearth, the children, the tools drying by the wall, the time of day guessed from dim light. Stillness, frontier style, is full of chores. At some point the storm may deepen so much that even stepping outside becomes questionable. Snow drifts against the door, wind steals breath. The yard is no longer a yard, but a white confusion of ridges and hidden objects. A fence rail might vanish completely. Steps disappear as soon as they are made. If you must go out, you do it with purpose and no vanity. A person lost in a frontier storm does not lose an argument. He loses direction, sensation, and minutes. Then there are the quieter storms, the long steady snowfalls without dramatic wind. These can be almost worse in their own sly fashion. Snow piles and piles while the world grows hushed. Trees stand heavy and still. The cabin roof gathers weight. The path to the spring shortens into a trench. Fences sink and gates refuse to swing. When the sky clears, the clearing emerges transformed into a deep white landscape that looks calm and demands tremendous labour. You shovel, stamp, haul, dig, and repeat. The silence outside can feel immense, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot and the distant crack of a branch giving way. Silence after a storm is a frontier sensation that stays with people. It is not empty silence. It is muffled, thick, almost padded. Sound falls into it and comes back softer. The whole land seems to pause. Smoke rises straight if the air has calmed. Animal tracks print the untouched surface like writing. A rabbit has crossed. A fox has inspected. Deer have moved along the timber edge. These signs are suddenly vivid because the storm has erased older traces and given the world a clean page. There is beauty in it, of course. Even the most practical frontier eye can see that. Snow on cedar limbs, pale light across drifts, the strange brightness of a field under cloud. But beauty does not reduce the work. It simply accompanies it, like an elegant bystander unwilling to lift a finger. You still must clear a path, reach the woodpile, check the stock, and see whether the chimney draught remains sound. You still must ask whether another storm follows. When neighbours are nearby, The days after a heavy storm often bring a complicated urge. You want to know whether everyone else has come through well. You also may not be able to reach them. In some cases, people break trail to one another, carrying news, help, or simply proof of survival. Those visits can feel enormous. A human figure appearing through the white at last, wrapped in wool and snow crust, seems almost miraculous after long isolation. By nightfall, when the worst weather finally slackens, the cabin feels altered by what it has endured. The fire burns lower but steadier. Wet mittens hang near the hearth. The floor is marked by thawed snow and straw. Faces look tired in the dim light. Yet there is a quiet relief beneath the fatigue. The roof held. The chimney still draws. The animals remain sheltered. The door opens, even if grudgingly. The storm spent itself before the cabin did. That is how winter storms shape frontier life in 1815. They do not merely inconvenience, they interrupt certainty itself. They erase roads, stretch distances, trap households, and teach people how thin a line can be between familiarity and bewilderment. Still, when the wind finally moves off and the world settles into white silence, you are there inside the little patch shelter, listening to the hush that follows violence, grateful for walls, fire, and the simple fact of knowing where home is. After the storms settle into the ordinary hardness of the season, you discover a difficult truth about frontier winter. Work does not stop. It changes shape. Summer has fields and long daylight, and the loud busyness of growing things. Winter has repetition. Winter has repairs. Winter has the sort of labour that never looks heroic from a distance, though it quietly decides whether a household holds together. By 1815 on the American frontier, you do not get to spend cold months reclining by the hearth in thoughtful rustic charm. The hearth is precisely where unfinished work comes to find you. The morning begins with yesterday's tasks waiting in slightly altered forms. Clothes that dried stiff near the fire must be softened and put back on. Boots need checking for splits, loose stitching, or damp leather that will punish your feet outdoors. The axe handle may need tightening, a bucket hoop may have shrunk. A broken strap that seemed manageable 3 days ago has now become urgent, because it is the only good strap left. Winter turns small weaknesses into loud necessities. You sit near the light if there is any decent light and mend. Wool socks are turned inside out and darning begins. Thread passes through worn spots with patient economy. Fingers catch on rough yarn. Needles feel tiny and uncooperative in hands more used to lifting than finesse. The room smells of smoke, wool, and maybe a little tallow from a candle guttering nearby. Mending is not glamorous, but every saved stocking means warmer feet, fewer sores, and one less crisis to solve later. Clothing asks constant attention because winter clothing is not decorative. It is equipment. A ripped mitten is a hazard. A loose seam in a coat is an invitation to misery. Moccasins, shoes, leggings, shawls, cloaks, caps, and blankets all need inspection. Leather stiffens in cold weather and can crack if neglected. Wool felts, stretches, snags, and sometimes shrinks into new and unhelpful shapes. You patch elbows, reinforce knees, resew ties, and turn worn garments to get a little more life from the less damaged side. The frontier has a genius for making the word enough stretch farther than logic suggests it should. Women often carry a heavy share of this indoor winter labour, though the division of work varies from household to household and necessity happily ignores theory. Men mend harness, patch tools, carve handles, repair sled runners, shape pegs, scrape hides, or twist rope. Children pick oakum, wind yarn, card wool, shellcorn, or do the smaller repetitive jobs that teach patience early. Older people, when present, may become invaluable winter workers because they can mind fires, watch children, sort stores, spin, sew, or advise with the maddening confidence of experience. Spinning and weaving belong to this season too, when households have the materials. The sound of a spinning wheel adds a soft whirring pulse to the cabin, a domestic rhythm very different from the axe blows of autumn. Wool smells earthy and faintly oily as it is carded into rolls. Flax, where used, asks for its own stages of handling and often less affection. Thread appears gradually from practiced hands, almost like a small, quiet miracle of persistence. Cloth is time made visible. Every length of it carries hours inside. One quirky tidbit from early American household life is how thoroughly scraps were valued. Tiny cloth remnants, worn blanket pieces, odd lengths of yarn, old shirts too frayed to wear, all could be repurposed into patches, ties, stuffing, bandages, quilts, rag rugs, lamp wicks, or some other useful second existence. A frontier cabin in winter becomes a place where almost nothing is too humble to be reconsidered. Waste feels a little immoral when replacement may be months or years away. The tools of daily work also need winter care. Metal rusts if neglected, wood swells and shrinks, knife edges dull. A hoe may not be needed in frozen ground, but it should be ready when thaw comes. A gun must be cleaned carefully if it is to remain reliable for hunting or defence. Traps are inspected. Harness leather is greased if grease can be spared. Wooden handles are shaved smooth where splinters rise. The smells here are practical and strong. Oiled leather, wood shavings. Iron warmed near the fire, animal fat used for dressing or protection. Nothing delicate, everything purposeful. Indoor work has its own soundtrack. The click of knitting needles, the scrape of a knife shaping wood, the faint rasp of a whetstone, the pop of sap in a log on the fire, a child reciting letters if anyone in the household is lucky enough to make room for lessons, a baby fussing, someone clearing a throat made rough by smoke. These sounds fill the darker hours and keep the mind from slipping too far into the blankness winter sometimes tries to impose. Winter is also a season of cleaning in the least glamorous sense. Ash must be carried out. Soot settles. Bedding needs shaking. Straw ticks must sometimes be restuffed, turned, or aired. Corners collect dust, scraps, and evidence of both human life and rodent opinion. Chamber pots need dealing with. Buckets need rinsing. The floor, whether puncheon or packed earth, demands sweeping, though it never seems to stay clean for more than a moment. Frontier housekeeping is less about sparkle than about preventing the cabin from becoming unbearable. There is food work too, even when the harvest is long past. Corn may need shelling or grinding. Beans need sorting. Frozen items must be thawed carefully. Meat can be trimmed, rendered, or reworked. Lard is handled. Tallow is saved and made into candles if supplies allow. The making of candles is an entire winter world of its own, full of dipping, cooling, trimming, and the unmistakable smell of hot fat. A fresh tallow candle is useful, but no one pretends it carries the perfume of heaven. It smells earnest. Historians generally agree that winter on the frontier often intensified household production rather than suspending it. People repaired what summer had worn down and made what spring would require. Yet the exact balance between indoor manufacture and survival chores varied widely by region, household wealth, and stage of settlement. A newly arrived family in a crude cabin might spend winter barely keeping up with fuel and food. A more established one could devote more hours to spinning, tool-making, furniture improvements, or trade goods. The frontier was never one thing everywhere, which must have been inconvenient for anyone hoping to summarize it neatly. There is scholarly uncertainty, too, about how much time winter truly freed for reflective or educational pursuits. Some memoirs describe reading, letter writing, Bible study, or children's schooling by the fire. Other evidence suggests many households were simply too overworked, dimly lit and tired for much sustained leisure. Both are probably true depending on circumstance. A literate family with books and candles might carve out evening lessons. Another household, equally capable in theory, might have no spare light, no spare energy, and no reason to romanticize exhaustion. You feel that exhaustion in your posture. Winter work bends the back differently. Less broad swinging, more stooping, sitting, lifting from awkward angles, carrying from one place to another because indoor life creates endless little migrations of objects. A bucket from door to hearth, wood from pile to rack, wet clothes from peg to line to peg again, a broken stool to the corner for repair, a grain sack shifted away from mice, a bed pulled slightly from a drafty wall. The body's always adjusting the room. Sometimes the room fights back. Thread tangles, a pot blackens too fast near the fire, a tool you meant to fix yesterday breaks properly today. A child spills something that took time to prepare. A dog, in a burst of enthusiasm no one requested, tracks in mud or snow. Minor household disasters breed in winter because people and objects are packed closely together and both are tired. This is where patience becomes one of the most valuable frontier supplies, though sadly it cannot be salted, stacked or stored in barrels, and yet there is satisfaction in making useful things under pressure. A newly patched quilt feels heavier and more trustworthy. A chair that no longer wobbles restores a tiny portion of dignity to the room. A sharpened knife glides where it dragged before. A repaired harness promises future work. These are modest triumphs, but frontier life is built from modest triumphs repeated until they look like survival. Hands show the story of it all. Needle pricks, small burns from the hearth, cracks at the knuckles, resin darkening the skin, roughened fingertips from wool, flax, wood, and rope. Winter does not let the body forget what it has done. It writes its notes plainly. The shorter days shape the rhythm as much as the cold. Light enters late and leaves early. The pale sun, when it appears, may glance off snow with a brightness that hurts the eyes outdoors, and then abandon the room to gloom by mid-afternoon. Indoor tasks are chosen partly by visibility. Fine stitching belongs to the best light hours. Coarser work can continue in dimmer conditions by fire or candle. Reading, if anyone manages it, is often saved for moments when fuel, eyesight, and calm all happen to agree at once, which is not a daily miracle. Children experience this season as both labour and confinement. They help more indoors now, and their restlessness can fill the cabin like another kind of weather. They whisper, squabble, invent games, chase shadows, or ask questions at astonishing frequency. Adults answer when they can and redirect when they must. In many households, winter becomes a season of storytelling, partly because stories occupy minds and hold bodies still for a little while. Tales of local events, Bible scenes, old countries left behind, animal tricks, weather marvels, and highly suspicious neighbour anecdotes all pass the evening hours. Oral culture thrives where candles are dear. There is also accounting, not grand bookkeeping perhaps, but the steady reckoning of stores, tasks, and prospects. How much meal remains, whether the soap will last, if there is enough thread for another round of mending, whether the seed corn set aside for spring remains safe from damp and mice. You may not write these things down, though some did. Still, you carry the numbers in your head. Winter trains the memory to become a cupboard. As evening deepens, the cabin glows with the peculiar intimacy of concentrated work. Someone sews, someone pares wood, someone stirs a pot, someone half dozes and then wakes with a start because rest itself feels guilty when so much remains unfinished. The smell of smoke folds around everything. Shadows shift across the logs. Wind brushes the walls without entering. For a brief moment, the room feels less like a refuge from the wilderness, and more like a workshop of endurance. That may be the truest version of winter labour on the frontier in 1815. It is not the dramatic struggle against a howling storm, though storms matter. It is the long chain of ordinary maintenance that prevents one hard season from unravelling all the others. You sew so feet stay warm. You scrape, patch, grease, mend, sort, twist, bind, and save, because broken things multiply quickly in cold weather and replacements do not stroll in from town. When at last you set the work aside for the night, your eyes are tired in a different way than after chopping wood. Your shoulders ache from stillness as much as effort. The repaired item beside you may look plain, even ugly. It may not impress anyone beyond the cabin walls. But out here, in a winter that punishes carelessness and waste with complete sincerity, usefulness has a beauty all its own, and the day's work, however small it seems, has quietly helped tomorrow remain possible. By this point in the winter, another truth settles over the frontier just as firmly as the snow. No household survives entirely alone, no matter how proudly it speaks. Distance may separate cabins, forests may interrupt the roads, and pride may keep people from asking for help until the last sensible moment. But winter has a way of exposing how connected everyone really is. A neighbour is not merely a pleasant social possibility in 1815. A neighbour can be news, labour, medicine, borrowed tools, shared seed, a midwife, a witness, a rescuer, a nuisance, and occasionally all before supper. You feel this most clearly when the weather eases enough for travel and a figure appears along the path. A man in a wool coat whitened with old snow, a woman wrapped in shawls, carrying a basket or a message, a boy sent ahead with a request, even from a distance. A visitor changes the air of the cabin. The dog notices first, then everyone else. The door opens, cold enters, so does information. The frontier runs on information almost as much as it runs on wood and meal. Who is sick? Who lost a cow? Which creek crossing is bad? Whether game has been seen near the ridge? If someone in the next settlement has extra salt? If a horse threw a shoe? If a traveller came through with news from town? If there may be trouble on the road? If there is talk of land claims, taxes, militia service, prices, marriages, deaths, preachers, thieves, wolves, or weather. News arrives in boots, not on paper for most people, and winter makes every piece of it feel heavier. The cabin smells different with company. Snow melts off cloaks and hats. Wet leather warms near the fire. Wool releases the cold outside into the warmer, smoky room. A visitor brings in the scent of horse, frozen air, distant woods, and another household's life clinging faintly to cloth. It is a strangely moving thing, that reminder that your own cabin is not the whole world after all. Hospitality matters here. Even when supplies are tight, a seat by the fire is offered, a cup is filled, food, if there is any decent food to offer, appears in some form. This is not because frontier people float about in endless cheer. It is because mutual dependence has rules, and hospitality is one of them. A person who comes to your door in winter may one day receive you at theirs under less favourable circumstances. Warmth shared is often warmth invested. Historians generally agree that frontier communities depended heavily on reciprocal labour and neighbourhood exchange, especially in sparsely settled regions where institutions were thin and professional services scarce. Barn raisings and harvest bees get more romantic attention, but winter cooperation could matter just as much in quieter ways. A borrowed kettle, a sled loaned for hauling, a few days of help after an illness, a woman sitting up with a new mother, men cutting a path after deep snow. Such acts were practical, but they were also social glue. That glue, of course, could stick unevenly. Not all neighbours were beloved. Some talked too much, borrowed too slowly, returned too little, drank unwisely, bragged constantly, or maintained livestock with alarming optimism. Frontier life placed people in one another's orbit whether or not they were ideally suited for friendship. Winter intensified these relationships because isolation made even an irritating neighbour useful. There is a special kind of respect reserved for someone whose opinions you do not enjoy, but whose horse team you might need. One quirky tidbit from early American rural life is how often visits mixed necessity with storytelling, in ways that made it hard to tell where business ended and entertainment began. Someone might arrive to borrow meal and remain to recount a remarkably detailed incident involving a fox, a frozen river, a suspicious stranger, and a cousin who made all the wrong decisions. On the frontier, gossip travelled in the same wagon as practical intelligence, and no one always separated them neatly. You listen carefully because rumour can help or harm depending on how it is handled. A story about sickness in another household may warn you away from a visit, or prepare you to offer aid cautiously. A tale of wolves near the stock pens may be true, exaggerated, or based on tracks that belong to a dog with theatrical ambitions. News of political matters, treaties, trade, or distant conflict may arrive distorted by miles and retelling. Yet even distorted news matters, because frontier people lived close to uncertainty and learned to pull meaning from partial reports. There are times when you must go to others, not merely wait for them to come. Perhaps your supply of salt has run lower than pride can justify. Perhaps someone in the household is ill, and a woman known for herbal skill lives 2 miles away. Perhaps you heard that a neighbour has lost a roof board in a storm and needs a hand. Travel in winter is never casual. You wrap carefully, judge the sky, consider the route, and calculate whether daylight will hold. Still, you go because the frontier is full of jobs too large, too urgent, or too miserable to face without help. The roads, where roads exist, are rarely elegant this time of year. Frozen ruts jar the bones. Thawed patches become slick mud before refreezing meanly at dusk. Snow hides holes and roots with false innocence. A horse breathes steam. Harness creaks. Boots gather crusts of slush or powder depending on the day. Yet reaching another cabin through all that can feel surprisingly heartening. Smoke rising from a chimney. Dog barking. Chickens fussing near a shed. A door opening into light. Human life makes a powerful picture in winter. Inside another household, you immediately notice comparisons. Their cabin may be tighter or draftier than yours, their woodpile larger, their children noisier, their food more generous or more strained. Their fire smells of hickory rather than oak. Their shelves hold things you wish you had thought to save. Such comparisons are natural, though frontier etiquette generally prefers them to remain inside your head. Envy and gratitude often sit side by side in these moments. Women's networks in frontier communities often carried enormous weight through winter, though the records do not always praise them loudly enough. Recipes, remedies, sewing help, childbirth assistance, care for the sick, the lending of cloth, patterns, or kitchen tools, all moved along lines of female knowledge and obligation. Men's exchanges of labour and equipment were visible and valued, but domestic support systems could be just as important to survival. The frontier liked to celebrate the lone capable man with a rifle. Reality usually looked more like a group of tired adults passing skills and favours in every direction. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how cohesive frontier communities truly were in all places, because local accounts differ sharply. Some memoirs describe warm mutual aid and frequent sociability. Others present a harsher world of suspicion, ethnic tension, class friction, legal disputes, and guarded self-interest. Researchers continue to debate whether later generations softened these rough edges into nostalgia. Most likely both kinds of communities existed, sometimes within the same county. Winter does not improve human nature. It only reveals what is already there and makes people deal with it in closer quarters. Religion enters the picture too, when itinerant preachers, local gatherings, or simple household devotion shape community life. A prayer meeting, Sabbath reading, or shared hymn in a neighbour's cabin can become part spiritual comfort and part social reassurance. Voices together in a smoky room sound different in winter, softer and more needed. Even those not especially pious may appreciate the gathering itself, the candles, the news exchanged afterward, the confirmation that other people are still out there pushing through the same season. Yet tension never disappears entirely. Borrowing can wound pride, debt can sour kindness. Rumours can spread faster than facts and linger longer. If one family seems to fare better than another, talk may follow. If someone refuses help or offers it with a little too much superiority, memory keeps the record. Frontier society is intimate enough that slights do not vanish easily. You may need the very person who annoys you most. There is your winter lesson in humility. Children experience neighbouring households almost like alternate worlds. Different food on the table, different rules, a cat of unusual fatness, a fiddle, a better storyteller, a stricter mother, a baby, a bed tucked in a different corner. Visits widen their sense of the community and also of possibility. Adults are noticing other things, of course, such as whether that family truly has enough meal left, whether the old grandfather looks weaker than before, whether the youngest child's cough sounds troubling. When help is needed in earnest, frontier response can be swift. Men may gather to clear a fallen tree from a path, recover livestock, or help a family whose chimney collapsed. Women may arrive with broth, candles, and those calm, efficient hands that seem to know what to do before anyone says it aloud. Teenagers carry messages. Children are moved out of the way or handed smaller tasks that make them feel usefully miserable. In such moments, Community stops being a moral idea and becomes muscle. Evening visits hold a special atmosphere in winter. The work of the day has worn everyone down, but that very weariness can make company dearer. Firelight moves over faces. Someone tells a story. Someone mends while listening. Someone laughs harder than the joke deserves because laughter itself feels warming. The room smells of smoke, food, thawing clothes, and human closeness. Outside, the dark fields and timber keep their cold silence. Inside, time briefly feels shared instead of borne alone. Still, the visit ends. It always does. Coats are pulled on, scarves adjusted, farewells exchanged at the door with visible breath drifting between words. A traveller steps back into the dark or toward a waiting horse. The dog barks once more. Then the cabin closes and the household returns to its own sound. Yet something lingers after company leaves. New information, certainly. Perhaps borrowed yeast, a promise of help, a warning about the creek, a bit of medicinal herb, a scrap of comfort. Also the renewed awareness that survival on the frontier is not a solitary performance, no matter how often stories try to make it one. That may be the deepest winter knowledge neighbours provide in 1815, not just practical aid, though that can be life-saving, not merely gossip, though gossip undeniably flourishes wherever two people and a fire are present. What neighbours offer, at their best, is a way of shrinking the wilderness slightly through human connection. One more cabin known, one more family accounted for, one more path worn between doors in the snow, in a season so skilled at making people feel small and scattered. The shared map of obligation and care can feel almost as valuable as food. Late winter has a personality all its own. It is not the fierce introduction of first cold, nor the blunt shock of early storms, nor even the deep dark stretch when every morning feels carved from the same block of ice. It is something meaner and more complicated. By now, your body is tired in ways that no single night of sleep can repair. Your stores have thinned. Your patience has worn smooth at the edges. The cabin still stands. The fire still answers. The animals still require care. But everything carries the weight of repetition. And yet, somewhere beneath that fatigue, another feeling begins to stir. Expectation. The land does not offer spring generously at first. It teases. A noon sun lingers a little longer on the south side of the cabin. Snow on the roof softens and slips with a sudden wet sigh. The path to the woodpile turns from hard-packed white to churned slush by afternoon, then freezes into treachery again after dusk. Water drips from eaves. Mud reappears in streaks. The air one morning smells faintly different, less metallic, more earthy, as if the ground is breathing through the snow in small hidden places. You notice every sign because winter has trained you to notice everything. A bird call returns where silence used to sit. The chickens behave less offended by daylight. A cow seems restless in a new way. The dog spends longer sniffing the wind. In the woods, the trunks still stand black and bare, but the light among them changes. It grows less brittle. Even the smoke from the chimney looks different against a paler sky. This is the season of dangerous hope. A warm day can fool you into easing your caution just when cold still has plenty of power left. Historians generally agree that late winter and early spring were often among the hardest periods for frontier households, not because the weather was always at its worst, but because provisions ran low, roads turned miserable, and bodies were already worn down by months of labour. The phrase starving time belongs more famously to other settings, but the underlying truth remains. The end of winter could be a cruel stretch of shortage and exhaustion. Food feels the strain most clearly now. Barrels are lighter. Meal is measured more carefully. Salt meat, if any remains, may be tougher cuts, smaller scraps, or the bits once passed over when choice was possible. Beans still simmer, but not in the quantities you would prefer. Root vegetables, if they survived storage, may be sprouting or softening. Flour is precious enough to make a person think twice before brushing a single handful from the table. Supper still happens, but it has a narrower look. The body knows it too. Your movements are efficient, but there is less extra in them. Muscles answer, though sometimes a beat late. Hands stay rough and cracked. Faces indoors look leaner in the firelight. Children may seem both tired and suddenly lively at once, as if their spirits sense change before their stomachs trust it. Adults speak less about the future in grand terms and more in specific hopes. A little more meal, one good hunt, a dry week, a calf born healthy. The creek passable again. Late winter work is awkward because the season cannot decide what it wants to be. Snow remains in drifts and shadows. Ice hardens in the morning. By afternoon, thaw begins in patches and turns the yard into a battlefield of mud, slush, manure, and broken straw. Boots sink where they slid the week before. Wheels bog down. Sleds lose their usefulness before roads are fit for wagons. Travel becomes almost insultingly difficult, with neither winter's clean frozen surfaces nor spring's settled dryness to help you. One quirky tidbit from frontier life is how often people complained about mud with nearly the same passion they brought to snow and ice. Mud lacked the beauty of snowfall and the drama of a storm, yet it could stop travel, ruin footwear, exhaust animals, and track half the yard into the cabin. It was not grand enough for legend, perhaps, but it was thoroughly memorable to the people hauling buckets through it. The cabin itself begins to change mood. During the hardest cold, the fire's warmth felt like salvation. Now it can feel too much by midday and not enough by dawn. Dampness returns in new forms. Snowmelt seeps. The floor stays dirty longer. Walls smell a little more of thawed earth and less of sharp frost. Blankets grow heavy with use. Straw bedding seems stale no matter how often it is shaken. Everyone is a little tired of the room, even while depending on it completely, outdoors. The sounds shift. Instead of only wind and the clean crunch of snow, you hear dripping, sucking mud, crows with renewed opinions, and the soft collapse of thawing crust underfoot. Water runs where nothing ran for weeks. A branch falls in the woods with a damp crack. Somewhere near the creek, ice loosens and complains to itself. It is not yet a spring song, but it is no longer winter's deep hush. Animals feel this unsettled season strongly. They shed, stamp in muck, and nose at any early green thing with foolish optimism. Hay remains necessary, feed still valuable. Yet livestock begin to act as if they have heard a rumour of better days. Chickens may lay a little more. Cows shift with the promise of calving. Horses become friskier when the air softens, which is charming only until one of them decides to express joy at the exact moment you're carrying something heavy. You watch pregnant animals especially carefully now. A new calf, lamb or foal can mean food, labour, trade, and simple morale. Birth on the frontier is always serious business, but in late winter it feels like a wager placed against hunger itself. The smell of straw, damp hide, and warm animal breath in a chilly shelter can make the whole future feel close enough to touch. Not guaranteed. Never guaranteed, but close. Scholars still debate how much frontier households relied on late winter foraging and early wild foods in different regions, because local ecologies varied and surviving records are uneven. Some communities eagerly sought early greens, sap, fish runs, or other seasonal resources as soon as conditions allowed. Others appear to have depended more heavily on stored provisions until cultivated food returned. What seems certain is that people read the land carefully for signs of edible renewal. After a long winter, the smallest fresh thing could feel almost luxurious. Maple sugar season, in places where sugar maples grew and people had the knowledge and tools to tap them, was one of the more hopeful events of this turning time. Sap runs when days warm and nights freeze. Buckets or troughs catch the clear sweet liquid. Fires boil it down into syrup or sugar. The smell is faintly sweet and woody, a gentler scent than pork fat and smoke. The labour is not small, but the reward tastes of brightness. Indigenous peoples and settlers alike knew the value of this seasonal gift. Though frontier access and methods varied widely by region and culture, a bit of sweetness after months of salted and dried fare could lift a household's spirits more than any philosopher could explain. Children feel the thaw first in their behaviour, even when the weather is still half hostile. They push nearer the door, restless for longer time outdoors. They splash where they should step. They come back muddier, louder, and full of observations nobody asked for. There is water under the fence. The creek is louder. They saw a birdie, they found grass. Their energy itself feels like a weather change. Adults are more restrained because they know how often winter snaps back. A warm afternoon can be followed by a hard freeze that night. Roads that almost seem passable become polished traps by morning. A thaw can weaken ice dangerously at the streams just as travel begins to look easier. Hope must be handled with care, like a full pail on slippery ground. There is also planning to be done. Seed corn or seed grain must be checked, protected, and kept back from hungry hands. Tools for spring work need to be truly ready, not merely promised. Harness, plough parts, hoes, axes, fences, all come back into active thought. The frontier does not let one season end before the next begins asking for labour. You are still surviving winter while already preparing for planting. Rest remains theoretical. Neighbours reappear a bit more often when weather and roads permit, and their visits carry a different tone now. Less storm anxiety, more speculation. How soon will the creek drop? Has anyone seen geese? Is the road to town open enough for a wagon? Who has enough seed? Who lost animals? Who came through well? News in late winter is full of possibility and caution mixed together, like everything else in this season. A scholarly uncertainty remains over how quickly isolated frontier households truly return to regular travel and exchange after severe winters. Some local records suggest rapid resumption once routes softened. Others describe long muddy delays and continuing scarcity well into early spring. The difference likely depended on geography, river crossings, wealth, and the quality of local roads, which is to say on a great many things beyond any one family's control. That uncertainty itself feels faithful to frontier life. Much always depended on conditions no person could command. And yet the signs accumulate. More daylight at supper, a smell of wet bark in the woods, the first insect fool enough to appear near the wall, snow shrinking around stumps, fence rails emerging, the roof dripping with confidence, a patch of ground dark and visible near the southern exposure. You stop and look at it longer than the patch deserves. Bare earth should not feel emotional, but after months of white, grey, and smoke, it does. One evening the sunset holds colour a little longer, soft gold and rose beyond the black trees. Another morning the air is still cold, but not cruel. You hear running water before you see it. The creek, half choked with ice not long ago, has found its voice again. It speaks in a quick cold rush over stones, and that sound goes through you like relief. Water moving freely means motion, looseness, change. Winter may not be finished, but it is no longer in unquestioned command. By now you understand survival differently than when the cold first began. It is less dramatic and more exact. Not some single heroic moment, but a long loyalty to ordinary tasks. Fires fed when tired, stores guarded carefully, animals watered in the dark, roofs patched, neighbours helped, illness nursed, hunger measured, tools mended, children kept warm. One season endured by refusing to neglect the next practical thing. That is what the winter demanded, and that is what you have given it. So when the thaw finally becomes undeniable, when mud winds and dripping eaves keep time all afternoon, when the wood smell of wet leaves and old bark and the sky carries that softer light, you do not celebrate with grand speeches. You breathe. You step outside and let the air touch your face without flinching quite so hard. You look over the yard with all its mess, its thawing ruts and weary fences and smoke-darkened cabin walls, and you see not elegance but proof. You're still here. The household is still here. The stubborn little world built against the cold has held, and as night comes, gentler now. The cabin settles around you once more. The fire burns lower because it can. Damp boots wait by the door. The last of winter lingers in shaded corners and chilled boards, but the air carries change in it. Beyond the cabin, water moves, mud softens, animals stir, and the land slowly releases its grip. You lie down at the end of the day and feel the weariness of the whole season resting in your bones. Yet it is a different weariness now, edged with easing. Outside, the darkness no longer feels sealed shut. Somewhere in it, beneath the melting snow and black wet branches, The frontier is preparing to green again. Not quickly, not kindly, but surely enough for a tired soul to believe in. The fire gives a last soft crackle. The room breathes. The long winter loosens. Now let everything grow quieter. Let the dripping roof become a slower rhythm. Let the mud outside settle into stillness. Let the dark trees stand without threat, only shape and shadow under a gentler sky. You have carried wood, counted food, watched over the sick, fed the animals, patched the walls, and listened through storm after storm. The season asked much. It asked for patience, steady hands, and mornings that began before comfort. It asked for courage in such ordinary forms that it rarely looked like courage at all. So now the cabin can soften around you. The smoke above the hearth thins, the blankets hold their familiar weight, the night air beyond the walls is cool but no longer endless. Somewhere nearby, water keeps moving through the dark, quiet and certain. Somewhere under the earth, roots are waking. The fields are resting beneath the last damp traces of snow. The animals are still. The tools are waiting. Dawn will come in its own time. You do not need to hurry toward it. For now, you can simply rest in this small frontier room, held between winter and spring, between hardship and renewal, between the last ember of cold and the first promise of green. Let your breathing slow with the fading firelight. Let the sounds grow softer and farther away. Let the long season drift from your shoulders, one careful burden at a time. And as the night deepens, you can let the American frontier of 1815 fade gently into darkness, into thawing earth, into quiet water, into sleep.